We're here with Chad Millman, Vice President, Editorial Director, Domestic Digital Content, graduate of the Indiana University, Hoosier.
Yes.
You still follow the Hoosiers?
I do, painfully so. It's a little more fun to follow football now than basketball, just because they're frustrating.
Yeah, well, you're talking to U of I students, so we can relate to football and basketball.
Yeah.
So before we get into all that you do, one of the things that you have done and done for a very long time is write on gambling. How did that come about, and what do you do exactly with that?
So I don't actually write about it anymore, but we did start a vertical on ESPN.com called Chalk that covers sort of the entire world of sports betting, and it's something I have been interested in for years. I started at ESPN the magazine in 1998, and one of my early assignments was to write a story about the guys who create the point spreads for the NCAA tournament. And so I wrote a story about this guy who was the lead bookmaker at the Stardust Hotel. And when I was done with the story, I thought, wow, this would be a great book. I had written a book before, and I thought sort of spending a year following this guy as he's trying to match wits with professional gamblers would be fantastic. So I ended up leaving ESPN to go write this book, and then came back to ESPN a couple years later, and then just sort of kept up with the industry, and just thought it was always fascinating the way decisions were being made that had an impact on the way millions and millions of fans enjoyed games, watched games, the prism through which they talked about games. And so I started writing a daily blog about sort of the science of sports betting and the analytics of sports betting, and who were the wise guys, which were the professional bettors, what were they thinking about versus the bookmakers. That became a podcast, and that became regular appearances on television. And in my newer role, I just thought, let's just start this vertical and hire a lot more people to do it. And so now we've just got a lot of people to do it, and it's fantastic.
And so, gambling has kind of been something that at some point, the networks kind of, they, especially during the broadcast and stuff, they know it's out there, don't necessarily talk about it. Now it's kind of changed. Everything's about fantasy and you hear the point spreads. There's been that shift, so to speak, right? I mean, it's too big to ignore.
It's too big to ignore, and we've had a lot of conversations about it. I remember when I wanted to start writing my column that became a blog in 2008 or 2009, I had to put together this whole memo for some of the executives here explaining the logic behind what I wanted to do, and that I didn't want to be a tout service. I wanted to cover the world of point spreads and the world of professional betting and the world of gambling writ large, the way we cover the NFL, the way we cover the NBA. I wanted to break news on it. I wanted to analyze it. I wanted it to be about information and not just about here's who you're going to pick. And so with that premise, we were sort of allowed to sneak into that space, and it's just gotten continually larger since then, with a lot of people becoming more and more comfortable with the idea and the content.
So you've been in many different facets of ESPN. Prior to your current position, you ran ESPN magazine.
Correct.
And again, that's been a great, successful venture for ESPN. And it's an example of way back when it first started, how the ESPN wanted to be more than just a TV network,
sure.
Right? I mean, it was about expanding. It was total. I mean, I was joking with Patrick Stegman about total world dominance. But
right.
but this is an example of how this company was not going to be discontent doing what it was doing. It was going to look to expand. And how did it do that with the magazine?
Yeah, I think that it's in the spirit of what ESPN is to always be thinking about what's next. Actually, one of the best things about being at ESPN is that everyone sort of is cognizant of the fact that ESPN is a massively successful company, and that we do what we do very well, and that we're sort of number one by measurement of the metrics that people follow. But nobody sort of sits back and is thinking, okay, we're done. And there's the expectations of excellence are very high. And so while everyone sort of knows in the back of their mind that things are going well, everyone also plays a little bit desperate. Like, all right, what else is going on out there? What can we be iterating on? What can we be thinking about? You see it in the digital space, the way we're getting into Snapchat, the way we're thinking about content, the way we're putting content out on different distribution platforms, and the different kinds of content we're doing in digital that might be more social and viral. So to take it back to the magazine, I think that was the spirit in which it was sort of created. I think that the folks who started it, which is really John Skipper, who is now president of ESPN, and John Walsh, who had been sort of a lead consigliere for a long time, and John Papanek, who had been at Sports Illustrated and was hired to run ESPN, the magazine, and Gary Honig, they had a vision for something that was a lot different than what Sports Illustrated was doing. They wanted it to be not just about covering the events. They saw the way the industry was heading, and that coverage events was being handled by ESPN in a way where within 24 hours, what had been sort of the centerpiece story for SI, which was, game stories that came out on a Thursday about a game that happened on a Sunday, were becoming less and less relevant. And so they had a vision for a magazine that was much more centered around storytelling and what's next in sports. And so it was based on previewing events and previewing the people that you thought you were going to need to know about and setting an agenda in the conversation.
Mm-hmm. And it was just more than just the way the approach, there was the look of the magazine.
Sure, yeah.
And so how was that for students who weren't familiar? That was when that magazine was rolled out, the oversized format, some of the design. What was the idea behind that, and how did that change?
It was big and splashy and in your face, and it was not meant to be your father's magazine. I can remember I started the magazine in '98. My first issue was the second issue of the magazine, and after we had come out, and it was fairly successful as soon as it launched. I mean, in terms of quality and subscribers, and the font was the type size was very small, and it was huge size magazine, big pictures. The covers were not action covers; they were stylized covers. It was a dramatically different point of view than what people were used to getting in a sports magazine. And we were sitting in a meeting, and it was a staff meeting, and John Skipper was speaking to the group, and he was saying how we were sort of weighing the feedback and the criticism of the magazine, and some people were saying, like, the font's too small, the images are too big, and it was reflective of criticism from people who were outside the demographic that we wanted to be reading the magazine. And he goes, that is criticism I'm perfectly okay with. Those are not the people we want reading the magazine. And it set an agenda and a tone for how we were going to think about content going forward.
So speaking of content, what was behind the creation of the body issue?
So that was certainly an idea that was generated by Gary Belsky, who was my predecessor as editor-in-chief. And there had been talk about the swimsuit issue was successful. What can we do? And someone had mentioned, like, should we be doing the swimsuit issue? And it just felt completely the complete antithesis of what we are and who we are as a magazine. And so Gary was thinking long and hard, like, we cover sports, and we profile athletes, and athletes are proud of their bodies, and, like, the next best thing to having models in bikinis is going to be having the people that we cover, athletes, talking about how proud they are of their bodies. And so that led to the body issue.
And that's been a remarkable franchise for you guys.
Franchise that has exceeded any expectations. It's gotten exponentially bigger every year, and it sort of has made ESPN the part of a different conversation as a whole, not just the magazine, because those images go out worldwide. And in the best sense, they sort of shine a light, almost literally, on the sensibility that the magazine has, the sensibility that ESPN has, our ability to connect with the highest profile athletes and sort of to highlight the photography and sort of the beautiful imagery that we can produce.
And before we kind of go off the magazine, I want to highlight I think the writer right now, the number one writer maybe of this generation, Wright Thompson. And if you haven't read him, the students, you have to just go Google and read.
Sure.
But take some time. He writes long stories, but he's unbelievable. And he wrote a story this past year about Tiger Woods that was just amazing. The last couple of years ago, it was Michael Jordan turning 50. I mean, I would go read those stories, and really, I mean, his writing and his work ethic is amazing. What was it like, and what is it like working with him? What's his process like?
It's phenomenal. You know, it's funny. Like, we always joke that we have 4 Pulitzer Prize winners who contribute to the magazine or are on staff at ESPN generally, and Steve Fainaru, Don Van Natta, Eli Saslow, and J.R. Moehringer. And none of them are Wright Thompson, you know, and like that's sort of how well he is performing right now. And it's not a knock on them. It's just he is an amazing talent, and he is finding subjects that he is so passionate about, and he's pretty obsessive. And so when he commits to a topic, then he's in it full bore. And what we realized was that the best thing we can do for Wright is to stop talking to him when we give him an assignment. So he gets an assignment and then he disappears, and he is sending you notes on what he's getting, and he's excited about it, and will call in to say, hey, this is going on, that's going on. But he's not the kind of guy who you want to pull away from a big idea if he feels like he has something. Tiger Woods was a great example of that. You know, he would be emailing me like, hey, I gotta go. I want to get as close to Tiger as I can when he's on his yacht in the Bahamas or wherever he was. He goes, the only way I can do it is if I'm staying on the harbor, which means I need to rent a yacht in order to stay on the harbor. And like, you're just not going to say no to that, because you know the result.
No, you're not going to say no to that?
No, because you know the result is going to be, I am going to get a phenomenal story about Tiger Woods. And you want to feed that obsession, and you want him to be sort of as focused and vigilant on getting the best possible stuff that he can get and getting the best possible access he can get. And he's a magician about it. We were trading notes on an idea the other day, and it was just something that, like, he was asking me what's going on, and I said, I'm thinking about this, what do you think? And like within 5 minutes, he had sent me sort of 5 ways in which he would attack this story. And I hadn't even assigned it to him yet. Like, I was just sort of saying, these are what I'm thinking about. So when he's in, he's all in, and it's fantastic.
What was the bill for the yacht?
I can't remember.
Oh, you can't. I'm sure your accounting department can remember.
I can't remember.
I mean, you're talking about a day and age where newspapers won't send someone down the street because they they can't afford the bus fare.
Maybe
and you guys are renting a yacht?
Maybe it was like a dinghy, and like he just wanted to get into the harbor. I can't remember exactly, but like I just remember him saying, I need to do this, and I'm like, okay.
I want to get into what you're doing. You're running digital. You've already had several people on the digital side come in here. But one of the things that's really interesting with what you're involved in is this idea of cross platforms.
Yeah.
And the idea that and we talk about the ESPN something for ESPN magazine is not going to be just an ESPN magazine story. And you're involved. How is that working? And what's that process? What's involved in that?
Oh, it happens like 5 different ways. I mean, sometimes it happens because we all have a big idea and we start working on it from the beginning, and it becomes a television series, and it becomes podcast, and it becomes SC featured, and it becomes a story in the magazine that manifests itself online in different ways. Sometimes it becomes a story that is on digital or in the magazine that we realize is blossoming into something bigger, and so we start calling our television counterparts and saying, hey, we think there's a good opportunity here. But that's also the beauty of being at ESPN, is the story is going to have multiple ways in which it can live and multiple platforms in which it can be distributed. It's great for the writers and for the creators because they get to see the impact their story can have and know that when they're working on something, it's got a chance to have legs that sort of extend its lifespan far beyond what it would have been if it was just a subject and verb story.
So do you have an example of how that kind of would manifest itself?
In a story, or what do you mean how it would?
Well, okay, you have an idea for a story.
Sure.
And how is it gonna? So you have a story that's going to be. You're going to cover a subject. It's going to be. Is it going to appear in digital? Is it going to?
So going back to Wright. Here's an example. So last August, we did an entire issue that was one story by Wright Thompson of the magazine about the 10-year anniversary of Katrina and the ways in which sports and the people who participate in sports and the Saints down to Little League football were impacted by Katrina, right? So that story was, Wright had called me on a Sunday night and was pitching a story about some kid in New Orleans, and then I was thinking, oh, that's interesting. We have like the Saints are in the middle of this sort of dirty family lawsuit between the owner and his daughter, and we sort of started riffing how there are 4 or 5 different things happening in New Orleans, and I'm like, let's just do the whole issue about this, right? And so we decide that's in May, and he goes to move to New Orleans for 2 months to report and write this story, and then in that time, we activate against one of our editors, Jenna Janovi, who sort of manages all of our enterprise content across platform. She organizes OTL to be doing a special about it, and organizes SportsCenter to be going down there for Katrina, and Wright is scheduled to be on set for all of it. And then the PR department activates and has Wright in 8 different places talking about it on television and radio. And so all of a sudden, sort of what started as a very small idea is activating online. In the series of a week, it's rolling out for 5 different days, and it's leading the website. And there are ancillary bits of storytelling that are photo-driven and video-driven and sort of focused on smaller stories within the New Orleans community. All of that sort of becomes much bigger because of the opportunities and the platforms that we have.
That's and that's what you have to do these days. I mean, your stories can't just live in one place, right?
No, they have to live on social, and not just on social, but in Snapchat and on Twitter and on Facebook and on Instagram. And the beauty is we have robust handles and followings for all of those things, and so you can think smartly about what kind of content works in each place and how can we sort of create new pieces of content that are very specific to these platforms.
And finally, before we wrap up, and I've been asking this question, when you ask people, when people say you tell people you work at ESPN, and they always say, "What's it like to work at ESPN?" What do you say?
It's crazy. It is. It's awesome, and sometimes you forget. You take for granted sort of where you're coming and what you're doing, and I've got friends visiting from Highland Park actually on. This weekend, and I was just in a closet where they had all these ESPN t-shirts, and I was just pulling t-shirts because I know that the kids are going to be so excited because they're coming to visit ESPN, right? And so there are times where I'm working on a project and I can call one of the best TV producers in the world and say, hey, I'm working on this, can you give me some advice and ideas on how to execute it based on what you know? And you can call the person who runs all of operations for ESPN and say, hey, would this be possible if we wanted to do something in a studio? And the people are so world class and so top of sort of form at what they do that it's just amazing that you can get things done that in other places would be so challenging to do.
Great. Thank you very much. Great stuff. Thank you.